Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up on the satellite imagery out to the west there, low pressure way back to the west, front edging its way eastward, right over the eastern Aleutians here with some wind and precipitation there. A lot of cloudiness out in advance of that. Just a narrow band of light precipitation there. Southwest of Nunivak Island, but north of the Pribilofs on back to the west. Mostly just clouds here with little if any moisture associated with that. Maybe possibly some over toward Nikolsky, but the main rain-producing clouds are out to the west. Otherwise, Bristol Bay and much of the interior looking really good today. Big area high pressure at the surface and aloft centered back to the northwest there over the Russian Far East. Flow around that, bringing disturbances southeastward along the eastern Arctic coast there where wind chills 65 below zero, 50 to 65 below depending on the wind speeds up there. And there's a winter storm warning out for the eastern coast, eastern Beaufort Sea coast for tonight and through tomorrow for continued low wind chills and maybe some snow and blowing snow, but those disturbances not all that strong, but coming southward here with some areas of snow associated with it. Pretty light. Really not making it past the Alaska range, but kind of sliding down there north of the border there from Skagway, but staying in Canada. Otherwise, clouds starting to organize a little bit there in the Gulf of Alaska as a trough slowly develops, and some more clouds down over the southern panhandle. Otherwise, partly to mostly kind of day there for the southeast coast. And up to the north again here on today's chart, big area high pressure at the surface, about 1,040 millibars here over the Russian Far East, but ridging nicely in across the north central interior. Northwesterly flow there, bringing the surges of flurries and fog, with the strongest winds again occurring on the eastern Arctic coast up there, and very cold temperatures as well. So with the wind chills 65 below zero in the forecast tonight and probably through most of the day tomorrow. And then those disturbances taking a more southerly route here across the eastern interior. So mostly cloudy skies with some light snow, especially along and north of the Alaska range here. But even in the heaviest areas, it's not much at all. And still breezy conditions, winds on the increase here for the Prince William Sound area, Copper River Delta today, and Valdez seeing some pretty good gusts, and otherwise windy over the northern panhandle, less wind, a few more clouds down to the south, and most of the snow showers or snow activity there near or east of the Hyder-Stewart areas. Another batch here mostly off the coast of Prince of Wales Island. Otherwise kind of watching areas of clouds here slowly develop and develop into more widespread area of snow later tonight and tomorrow, but out to the west, rain with that front. That's more or less stalled there over the central Aleutians. Winds strongest there in advance of the front, but not all that strong. And a narrow band of moisture here, kind of lost over in the northern Bering Sea with strong high pressure to the north that will hold through tonight here. About 1,036 millibars, so slowly weakening, but not much, just kind of a normal oscillation there with strong ridging, Arctic ridging, right across the central interior. So temperatures well below zero again tonight, coldest in the calm wind areas. And then a continuation of those weak disturbances skirting the Arctic coast with some light snow, fog, and some of that actually getting into the north slope, but nothing significant. And still windy on the east side there. So again, as I mentioned, the winter storm warning for the low wind chills will continue there for the eastern coastal areas. Otherwise, no change here. South central Alaska, clear skies, winds light for the most part, except in some channel terrain. But there is a high wind warning out for Thompson Pass for tonight through tomorrow, specifically Thompson Pass. Winds gusting to 80 miles an hour out of the northeast there with that pretty tight gradient, and windy conditions all the way into the northern panhandle tonight with gale force winds there, especially for Lynn Canal. And then lighter winds down to the south with less gradient, and still snow showers there kind of threatening the areas east of Metlakatla to Ketchikan and eastward. So Hyder Stewart seeing the best chance, and now we're seeing more widespread precipitation here developing with a new low center there well west of Prince of Wales Island, but quite an area here, and another low center near the Queen Charlotte. And we'll see for tomorrow that comes eastward here right off the Queen Charlotte Islands. So chance of snow and clouds over the southern panhandle. Not much change up to the north. Again, this easterly flow, upslope area of snow there. Not really making it, or won't make it, over the mountains there into the eastern areas. Maybe a few clouds, that's about it. Mostly clear skies, still cold temperatures, heavy freezing spray in the inside waters there from Stevens Passage northward, especially through Lynn Canal. Breezy along the coast, calm, mostly clear, cold temperatures tonight, tomorrow through the interior. And winds really not a problem here. High wind warning. Look for the winds to diminish throughout the day tomorrow for the Thompson Pass area. Pretty breezy here, northeast flow, offshore flow. That's going to keep it VFR, at least definitely along the coast, and probably a fair distance offshore as well. And then you get back into the clouds there with a chance of rain from Nikolsky on out to Adak and Atka. But again, winds not all that strong now with this frontal boundary there. But a new system coming in will probably bring some increasing winds toward gale force tomorrow afternoon, definitely by tomorrow night and into Tuesday. Otherwise, high pressure holding over the Russian Far East through tomorrow there, keeping no change in the weather up there for the Bering Strait, northern Bering Sea areas. Light winds St. Lawrence Island into the Chukchi Seas, and a continuation of those troughs coming southeastward. Areas of snow at times, light snow, Arctic coast there with occasional IFR with each passing trough as it moves on by, but south of the Brooks Range, from the Brooks Range southward, mostly clear, good VFR through tomorrow. That holds through for Tuesday. Got the wrong label up there. 1,040 millibar high here, eastern, just east of the Seward Peninsula now. So cold temperatures, but light winds from the Brooks Range all the way down the western interior to the Alaska Peninsula there. And again, the gradient right along mostly the Alaska Range. So looking at channeled gusty winds through the passes there. Otherwise, not too bad. Still looking at 10 to 15 knot winds for the marine areas of Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet, and maybe some small craft advisories there for the Barren Islands into Kamishak Bay. Otherwise, looking pretty good wind-wise. Copper River Delta, though, still good northerly gusts coming out of the Delta. And then an increase in the winds, this low here coming northward now, so that's going to drop the pressures. And looking at storm force winds now out of the north for Lynn Canal on Monday. And there's also a winter storm watch out for heavy snow here over the southern panhandle, Prince of Wales Island, eastward there to the border for heavy snow as that develops. And then, of course, lighter snow on up to the north, but could get some possibly all the way up to maybe Juneau here, but again, most of it staying along and east of the border. Otherwise, out to the west, not a lot going on. Strong ridge here over the western interior, down to even the eastern Aleutians. Good VFR along and off the coast there. Maybe some clouds with the Pribilofs. And fair conditions, really, for the central Aleutians here. And then you get into gale force winds west of Kiska Island out towards Shemya, with some precipitation holding way back to the west, and still occasional light snow and fog, along with some IFR with troughs passing along the eastern Arctic coast there. Winds probably will be a little lighter on Tuesday, but they won't, or on Tuesday they won't end again. They won't end completely, but you may lose the winter storm warning. Anyway, for the Panhandle, temperatures today all in the mid to upper 20s there, approaching 30 along the coast, but Klawock had 27, 23 there at the state capital. Over at Hyder, 30 degrees, 23 Yakutat, lower 20s from the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, with a 24 there at Seward. Homer up to 28, 22 in Kenai. Palmer, 21, 19 over at Talkeetna. Gulkana, 9 above, but Gunsight right at 0. Fairbanks there in Tanana Valley, 3 above 0 with Delta at 1, Fort Yukon also just a shade above 0 there, but Eagle at -3. And then we've got 17 below at Anaktuvik, and that general pattern all the way out to the Arctic coast, 15 to 20 below or 10 to 20 below there, most of the area. Although Cape Lisburne up to -4, -14 Kivalina, and a -11 there at Ambler with Shishmaref 9 below 0. Above 0 this afternoon there at Nome, barely with 4 degrees, -2. That's Unalakleet, and then St. Michael 6 above 0. Excuse me. And 10 for McGrath, and generally right around 10 on down the river valleys to the deltas, warming into the lower 20s along the coast. And for the Pribilofs, mid to upper 30s this afternoon, into the mid 40s here for the central Aleutians, 43 at Adak, 40 out at Shimia, and 39-degree reading observed both at Unalaska, Sand Point, Cold Bay up to 40 degrees, King Salmon 20 and 31 at Kodiak. For the lows tonight, drop 10 degrees off of that for Kodiak State Airport. For the lows for tomorrow morning, 21. A little below 0 there, northeast Bristol Bay, King Salmon to 3 degrees at Pilot Point, and then into the upper 20s for the western peninsula. Upper 30s for the central Aleutians, well below 0 here, especially north of the mountains, -30 to 40 below for the Tanana Valley. Northward all the way to the Brooks Range, a little milder, 20 to 30 below for the north slope, eastern Arctic coast. But the 0-degree isotherm all the way out to Nunivak Island here and near St. Lawrence Island, with lows in Panhandle kind of chilly, 5 to 15 to possibly as warm as 20. Highs for tomorrow coming up, longer days now, so the -34 low for Eagle will warm to 6 below, otherwise below 0 here north of the Alaska Range, single numbers west of the Alaska Range, south central Alaska, teens to lower 20s, lower to mid 20s for the Panhandle, near 40 for the Aleutians. And for flying weather for tomorrow morning, areas of marginal VFR for the north slope, including the Arctic coast as well. Could be some also areas of IFR to go along with that. Maybe some low stuff here in the interior due to those disturbances coming southward. That would be mostly along the north slopes of the eastern Alaska Range through here, and probably to a lesser extent out to the west. Otherwise, Bristol Bay VFR for the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow afternoon, probably staying mostly VFR down south. Look for a gradual increase in marginal VFR late in the day. And then definitely tomorrow night and for Tuesday, probably going IFR down there. Otherwise, some marginal stuff with the developing moisture in the Gulf of Alaska. Good flying, good visibility ceilings to unlimited here all the way up until you get to the Arctic coast. And Bering Sea, not too bad. Most of the low stuff out there, the IFR with the front across the central Aleutians. And for Anaktuvik, VFR tomorrow, as well as Adigan, looking really good. In fact, all the passes will be wide open. Lake Clark, Merrill, rainy, windy, as well as Isabel. Ceilings, visibilities unlimited for all of these passes, including Tanita and Portage. And once again, Chilkoot and White, VFR. For the freezing levels, again, cold northerly flow here, pushing those at the surface all the way south of the Gulf of Alaska down across the Queen Charlottes, and then that persistent southeast flow pulling a narrow wedge of fairly warm air northward here. We've got 8,000 feet there from Unalaska to almost Atka, with 2,000 feet up to the Pribilofs. And for icing, really none to speak of here over the interior. I get way out west here for some areas of light icing above about 4,000 feet, and then an increasing chance of icing here taking place over the southern Panhandle throughout the day tomorrow. A better chance tomorrow night into Tuesday. And for the jet stream here, big ridge out over the Bering Sea to the Aleutians. Northwest jet, 120 knots coming right along the Russian coast here and then diving into the southwest interior. Upper level low developing there right over the northern Panhandle, but most of the moisture is going to stay down to the south. And for 9,000 feet, we've got northerly winds 30, maybe 40 knots here, both at 3 and 9,000 feet, but lighter, more variable conditions off to the southeast. Not too bad over the interior, basically north, but just 5 to 10 or 15 knots. Westerlies around 25 on the eastern Arctic coast. Easterlies here right along the southwest coast up to 25. Light winds, Kodiak Island and the Barrens tomorrow. And then kind of a shear here, trough axis right through here, Northwest winds behind that up to about maybe 30 knots. Easterlies 25 for the northeastern Bering Sea and Bristol Bay area. Light to the north, and then southeast 40, or southerlies at 40 coming into the western Aleutians. Same pattern at 3,000 feet. A little lighter though, call it 30 out there for Shimmy and Attu. Stronger tomorrow night and the next day. And southeast 15, maybe up to 40 knots there, close to the Pribilofs. Back to 20 along the coast. Light winds over the interior here with high pressure in place. North of the ridge axis though, westerly winds 40 knots, possibly even at 3,000 feet here for the eastern Arctic coast, supporting that windy condition for the low wind chills up there. Northerlies up to 35, northern panhandle, much lighter into the central and southern areas. On to turbulence, occasional moderate chop here again where the strongest winds are. Pretty widespread here, especially for Lynn Canal back to Yakutat and right along the coastal mountains, as well as Prince William Sound there to the north, but smooth. Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, a little bumpy possibly here along the western Alaska Range, eastern Arctic coast, occasional moderate chop there, roughly Dead Horse eastward there to Nuvik, and smooth back to the west. Light moderate chop for the Alaska Peninsula becomes more in the way of moderate for Nikolsky to Atka, and then drops off to the west. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Did you know that the Concorde jet had radiation detection equipment on board to protect the crews and passengers from galactic radiation? This type of equipment was needed because of the high altitudes the jet flew. Typical commercial aircraft generally fly between 20,000 and 45,000 feet. The Concorde would routinely fly at about 60,000 feet. The Earth's atmosphere offers little protection from radiation at such high altitudes. In the event that high levels are detected, an alert would sound inside the cockpit, allowing the pilots to descend to safer altitudes. Radiation is all around us. In fact, everyone has been exposed to some form of it during their lifetime. Whether from sitting on the beach, having X-rays taken, or even flying in an airplane, radiation exposure is unavoidable. Most of us can take steps to limit our exposure through staying out of the sun, using sunscreen, or just staying away from potentially hazardous risks. Of course, astronauts don't have the same luxury. To help ensure their safety, sophisticated monitoring and shielded systems have been developed by researchers at NASA Johnson Space Center. Let's go back to Tonya St. Romain to find out more.
Radiation is one of the biggest dangers facing our space crews. In fact, exposure to it is such a risk that officially, the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration lists all astronauts as radiation workers. This designation means that over the course of their career, an astronaut can only receive the same levels of radiation as any other nuclear worker. Of course, since radiation does not stay constant in space, monitoring the fluctuating levels can be challenging. Since the end of the Apollo program, researchers have been able to keep close tabs on crew exposures due to the fact that none of our recent crews have traveled outside of the protection of the Earth's magnetosphere.
But what will happen when crews begin to travel on longer missions away from the protection of the Earth? To help answer that question, I spoke with Mary Van Balen at NASA Johnson Space Center.
As NASA's radiation health officer, I use the information that's provided from the dosimeters that the astronauts wear in space to assess their radiation exposure. I would think most people are familiar with a film badge that's used in an X-ray suite when they go to get X-rays done. We use similar passive monitors. We use different materials because the radiation environment in space is different, but it's the same basic idea. The crew member wears this badge or this dosimeter, and during the time of their space flight, and when they return to Earth, we process that dosimeter, which gives us an estimate of the astronaut's radiation dose in flight, and then we use that to compare to the radiation limits.
How do you limit the amount of radiation an astronaut's exposed to?
NASA starts off with using scientific evidence to know how much the human body can be exposed to without seeing any clinical damage. So short-term limits or career limits are used. Short-term limits are designed so that the astronaut wouldn't get too much radiation to cause one of the acute radiation syndromes. We also have career limits where we try to limit the astronaut to an increase of 3% of fatal cancer. Radiation exposures have a risk associated with them, and that risk that's most fundamental to NASA is an increase in cancer. And so we try to limit our astronaut crews to no more than 3%. It's kind of an interesting thing because the increased risk of cancer is based on the age at which you first received that exposure. So younger individuals are more susceptible or have an increased risk than older individuals. There's also a gender dependence on that, and so females are considered to be at higher risk for developing cancer. So our limits are set such that we keep the risk consistent across the board of that 3% cancer, but the number itself, or the radiation dose, might be smaller for a younger female.
What challenges will crews face when they leave low Earth orbit?
With the exception of the Apollo astronauts, all crews have remained within low Earth orbit. And in low Earth orbit, the Earth's atmosphere and the magnetosphere is actually protected. And so the magnetic charge on the fields actually prevents some of the particles from getting in. So the composition of the environment will be the same types of particles. However, there will be more outside of low Earth orbit. So missions to the moon will result in much larger radiation exposures. Going to Mars, those mission durations will be quite long. And so not only will you have a higher radiation field, you'll also have a longer duration within that mission. And so you'll result in larger exposures.
Welcome back. Small craft advisories here in the North Coast. Wind speed wise, 25 to 30 knots, higher gusts out of the passes. Northerlies down south, 20 to 25. And for Clarence Strait, north more or less 20 knots. And then into the gales here for Stevens Passage, and 40 knots out of the north with much higher gusts there for northern Lynn Canal with heavy freezing spray to go along with it. That continues, actually worsens as the winds pick up to 50 knots. So storm warnings here, especially northern Lynn Canal with stronger gusts, heavy freezing spray right down into at least Stevens Passage there with 40 knot northerlies, and southeast 25 for Clarence Strait. So definitely an area of low-level convergence going on down here, and looks good for the heavy snow watch that's out. Otherwise 20-25 knots east-northeasterlies along the coast. Increase to gales for most of the north coast here. Call it northeast 30 to 35, but much higher gusts coming out of the bays. Prince William Sound tomorrow, northeast 15, north 20 for the North Gulf Coast. Higher gusts dropping back to 15. And north 25 for the Barren Islands, but only 20 knot northwesterlies there for Kamishak Bay. Same thing along Kodiak Island. And 15 knot winds from the north-northeast for Cook Inlet. And for Tuesday, about the same, 15 to 20 knots south of the Forelands there. Small craft advisories possible here for Kamishak Bay. A little more likely though for the Barrens, around 30 knots, 10-foot seas. Just 20 knot winds there blowing across Kodiak from Shelikof Strait, so not too bad. Light north winds, 15 knots from the North Gulf Coast, and northeast 15 for Prince William Sound. Still looking at those stronger northerly gusts coming out of the Copper River Delta. Bristol Bay tomorrow, northeast 20, up to 25 knots on down the peninsula there with freezing spray. 15 knots, increased to 20 knots from Castle Cape to Sitkinak. For Tuesday, northerlies 25 knots, Sitkinak to Castle Cape, significantly lighter here west of that location. Northeast 20 on the Bering Sea side, dropping back to 10 for Bristol Bay. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, east-southeast, 20 to 30 knots, about sums it up there with seas 6 to 13 feet. Northwest here for the Central Aleutians at 30, southeast there in the afternoon coming up to 25 as that next front approaches way out to the west. And then definitely some full gales here on Tuesday, out 40 knots, falling back dramatically here, kind of a slack gradient there right over the Central Aleutians, so east-southeast 15, the way it looks at this point in time for Adak and Atka, and then only 20 knot winds out of the east for the Fox Islands. For the St. Lawrence Island area tomorrow, and actually Tuesday as well, pretty light winds basically from the northeast at 10, picking up to about 15 here north of Nunivak Island, and then 20 knot northeasterlies coming out of Kamishak Bay, small craft advisory for the Pribilofs. For Tuesday, those shift up here to St. Matthew Island and to the west. East of there, 15 on toward the coast, easterlies of 15 for St. Lawrence Island, southeast 20 for the Pribilofs. Along the eastern Arctic coast tomorrow, easterlies 15 to 25, possibly 30 knots there, strongest over toward Demarcation Point. But general westerly light wind pattern here, maybe up to 15 all the way back to the west, and that becomes northwest at 15 from Cape Beaufort on south. Then for Tuesday, they'll swing around to the south. Again, high center shifting eastward here into the northwest interior, so that'll turn those winds around to the south, possibly getting up to 20 knots there from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort. Otherwise, pretty light here on the west coast, and then the central coast, 15 out of the west, and keeping pretty breezy here along the eastern coastal with the brisk wind advisories there over the far eastern zone. And for tonight, again, just a continuation of passing disturbances there, bringing areas of light snow. Windy conditions, again, the winter storm warning, wind chills 65 below continue there for the eastern Arctic coast tonight into tomorrow. Nice weather over the interior, although dropping to 30 to 40 below in areas there at the Tanana Valley. And snow mostly staying out of the picture for the southeast coast there, but an area developing here in the Gulf of Alaska. Starts getting interesting actually beginning maybe tomorrow afternoon. Increasing chances of snow. There's that low shifts in toward the Queen Charlottes. Cold northerly outflow continues over the Panhandle. Not much change here for the interior areas or out to the west. And then for Monday, winter storm watch out for heavy snow over the southern Panhandle. Cold and windier to the north. No change over the interior. And otherwise, the Arctic coast, look for a little lighter winds on the east side. Thanks.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.